This week on Talking Politics.
There is no mandate for such a colossal increase in immigration.
I'm just saying we're in the world of all mess and no one ever talks about it intelligently.
It's not honest on either side of the debate.
Low growth is not our destiny. But growth will not come without a fight.
When will we actually see this third runway? She couldn't give me a date.
They knew that the narrative was very southern focused.
You never know who you're going to like when you meet a politician for the first time.
We can enjoy or not enjoy the company of any MP.
I got a call afterwards. This enraged official saying, why did you ask that question? Hello, I'm Tom Bradby, and welcome to the show, whether you are watching or listening. Anushka is here with me. Robert is not. If you're watching, you can tell that. Robert is interviewing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. As you do, he will try to join us later if his interview goes to time. But anyway, Anushka, it's very nice to have just you here. How has your week been?
It's been very interesting. It's been very good. I've been spending a lot of time speaking to groups like the IPPR and the Institute for Government, and last week the Resolution Foundation, because, as you know, my side job my other job is to work on the Peston Show, presenting data. We've got a new brilliant producer who's doing that with us, and so with him we've been touring the geeks, as we like to call them, and they all have really interesting takes on the Labour government, what's going on at the moment, on economic growth, and so on.
What are the headlines of that? If you had to pick out 4 or 5 things that maybe surprised you, that you heard this week, that people perhaps don't know.
I just thought of one, which the person said I can't say, so I'm not saying that.
Okay.
So chats behind the scenes with senior Labour people about how they believe that they have to have this much more disruptive politics right now, which is basically this idea of whose side are you on? And we've talked about this a lot, which is the politicians who seem to do well in lots of parts of the world are the ones who are anti-establishment, who say they're taking on the establishment on behalf of voters. And I think inside Labour, speaking to actually people inside Labour and those around them, including some of these groups, I think the thinking is, how do we set Keir Starmer so that he's actually on the side of voters rather than on the side of lots of institutions? And this sort of goes hand in hand with them getting unbelievably frustrated with the working of the civil service. I mean, it is hilarious, isn't it, how quickly people who go into government get frustrated with all the kind of mechanics of government and then want to change it. But I think that's a really difficult thing for Labour to do, because they've basically gone in saying, we respect the institutions, we respect the Office for Budget Responsibility, we believe in the civil service, and now they're suddenly thinking maybe that's not what voters want to hear.
Do you find, what's the mood music in government, and do you find cabinet ministers, senior people in the government relatively easy to engage with, relatively open, or are they kind of a bit standoffish with the media?
I mean, I think a bit of both. I think, lots of them will have lunch with you. I had lunch with a very senior person in Downing Street yesterday. Some of them will talk very openly about what's going on. I know quite a lot of them reasonably well, not only because I've been doing this since before many of them were MPs or when they became MPs, but also because I wrote a book I might have mentioned about that whole operation.
Very good, very successful book. If you haven't read it,
book,
please do.
And so I know a lot of them quite well in a way. I've spoken to them a lot, but I do think, and this is again the frustration we have every time a new administration goes in, and we see it every time, they so quickly become nervous of the media. And that relationship can be sometimes, is it hostile's the right word, or fractious, and they don't trust the media and they close in and they try and control everything. I thought actually was Rachel Reeves trying not to do that quite as much this week when she's like, I'll take questions from people with their hands up rather than just the list I've got written in front of me.
It's so funny, isn't it? And it's so often counterproductive. I remember when I was political editor, I had quite a good relationship with Gordon Brown before, when he was Chancellor, moving up to becoming Prime Minister. And I'd seen him quite a few times. We got on well. And then one of his assistants, who shall remain nameless, phoned me up one day because it was a Prime Minister's press conference, and there'd been an opinion poll on the front page of the Times that said that Brown was going to be a less popular Prime Minister than Blair, who was about to depart. And so I asked at the press conference Tony Blair, why is the Labour Party changing a not very popular leader for an even less popular one? And Tony Blair laughed and, I don't know, gave some pat answer. And then I got a call afterwards. This enraged official saying, why did you ask that question? I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, Gordon doesn't understand why you had to draw attention to him. Oh, the poll was on the front page of the Times, mate. What are you talking about? And it's that business of, you know, like you want to have a good relationship with them, but you also don't want it to affect your coverage, and you're determined that it's not going to affect your coverage, and you're trying to be fair. And, you know, some politicians can kind of accept that quite easily, and they sort of, you know, they understand it's like dogs and fleas and you've all got your purpose. And some politicians really don't. I think the other thing maybe people don't know is it's so sociable, Westminster. That's my memory of it. And actually the thing I miss most, you know, I'd often come in and for a day's work and I'd have a breakfast with someone, a lunch with someone, and sometimes even a dinner with someone as well.
Can't get that through expenses anymore, Tom, despite my best efforts.
Yeah. Okay, we should chat about that. Anyway, that maintaining...
Obviously, our job is to build relationships with these people and to understand what they're doing and get them to tell us stuff. At the same time, it's to hold them to account. And I just think that is the hardest thing about this job, is walking that line as carefully as you can. And some people are grown up about it and some are not. And it's easier when they're in opposition because sometimes they're sort of moving with the flow, whilst as soon as they go into government, everyone's saying, hang on, why did you do that? Why did you do that? That's unpopular, that doesn't work. I think you kind of have to rise above it in that situation. And actually, if I was them, I'd be a lot less controlled about it all. But
fair enough.
Maybe a journalist would always say that.
Yeah. I just wanted to say at this point, if you have any questions for us, do email them in to talkingpolitics@itn.co.uk. We're going to be probably doing a spin-off show fairly soon in which we take your questions and actually answer them. But for now, we're just very keen to know what you think of the show, what you'd like more of, what you'd like less of. Be polite. I mean, we get enough abuse on X. If you don't like it, say, but try
constructively.
You try to hold back on the swear words. What question would you most fear?
Something about what I actually think about people.
Oh, that's a really hard one. I find, yes, you're so right. I used to get asked that a lot. Like, you do an interview and someone said, so what do you really think of, you know?
Do you like them?
Yeah, do you like them? Do you like them? That's a hard one. You never know who you're going to like when you meet a politician for the first time. Did you find that? Like, you might think you're going to like X or like Y, but obviously there's personal chemistry involved and you just never know. And sometimes I'd go, and it's got nothing to do with party, like I liked people in all parties, and you would often turn up and you come out and you think, oh, that was a great lunch. I really got on with that politics. Invariably had precious little to do with their politics. Is that your experience too?
Oh yeah, 100%. Well, we have to be entirely neutral so we can enjoy or not enjoy the company of any MP. Yeah, I don't think it's linked to politics in any way. You know, people are more or less personable, more or less fun. I always think there's little things between parties that you can see. Like, I think Conservatives are more likely to drink alcohol in the day.
Oh, is that true?
I think so. I think Lib Dems are more likely to stick to the water.
Okay, God, that literally backs up every cliche there is, isn't there? God, I'd never thought about that. A Tory's more like, I mean, I was political editor for 10 years ago, so I feel like it was more of a drinking era. I always used to say to people, you know, would you like a drink? And you know, for a long time, if they always say, oh, well, I will if you will, which is it's disastrous. And then you kind of would have a drink. And then as time wore on, I thought I really don't want to drink at lunch. And so I would try and avoid it. But then it gets kind of...
The culture has changed a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, the culture has
less likely.
Culture has changed a bit. Part of the reason this came up is you said you're afraid of being asked the question as to who you like and who you don't like. And I completely...
And I won't answer it, just like a politician.
But I find I get asked that question a lot in interviews, actually, is like, who do you like and who you don't like? And I always kind of pick a few people, I think. Like, I remember going to lunch with Neil Kinnock for the first time, and, you know, 3.5 hours later and several bottles of wine down, I rolled away down the street. And I've always liked, you know, he's just the most tremendous company. I've liked him ever since. You know, equally well, I liked William Hague and various other people who I had no idea whether I'd like them or not, and you turn up and, you know, but he's very funny and engaged.
People can be charming, but it doesn't mean you should trust them.
Can we talk about immigration? Because obviously there was this prediction this week by the government's own body that suggested that the population was going to grow by 7 million over the next 5 years. That's the wrong way around. 5 million over the next 7 years.
Who voted for that? And will the government do something to ensure that the population of this country is sustainable going forward? Because there is no mandate for such a colossal increase in immigration in this country.
Now, that's a huge population growth, and they also made clear it was all going to come from immigration because births and deaths were going to cancel each other out. Now, for context, I'd have to say that if someone asked me, if anyone does email in questions about what things I've been most frustrated about over the covering politics for the last 35 years, it would, I might have a few choices, one of which politicians never answering the question, but I think pretty close to the top of the list would be all discussions about immigration. Now, that's not to say that I think immigration is good nor bad. That's not my position to say. It's just that on the one hand, and I just want to put this out there and see which bits of it you agree with and which bits of you don't. On the one hand, you have politicians repeatedly saying, certainly from David Cameron onwards, immigration is too high. We're going to do something about it. You know, Cameron obviously said we're going to reduce it to the tens of thousands.
If we take the steps set out today, if we deal with all the different avenues of migration, legal and illegal, then levels of immigration can return to where they were in the 1980s and 1990s, when immigration was not a front-rank political issue. And I believe that that will mean net migration to this country will be in the order of tens of thousands each year, not the hundreds of thousands every year that we've seen over the last decade.
So on the one level, they say something that's never going to be achievable, and they go on not to achieve and to miss their targets massively.
Affecting trust.
But here's the other point. When you look at the details, we need immigration the way our economy is structured in order to keep economic growth going. We need immigration to fill the jobs in the NHS and social care and all the other things that people don't want. We need immigration because if you actually look at the public finance graphs, obviously, certainly particularly when people came from Eastern Europe, we didn't have to, they came as fully fledged workers, we hadn't had to educate them, and they often went home before they retired, so we didn't have to care for them when they were old. That was very beneficial to the public finance, and on and on and on. There is a positive case for immigration, which no one ever makes. And we're sort of in this world where, like, okay, if you're gonna let hundreds of thousands of people in, first of all, you need to make the argument for it, and secondly, you need to build the houses and all this, and that just never happens. So we end up in this completely frustrating world where people are really annoyed about immigration. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying we're in the world of all mess, and no one ever talks about it intelligently. Fair or unfair?
I don't think no one ever talks about it intelligently. I think we do. We often have quite intelligent discussions about immigration, I think. But anyway,
I mean, politicians never really talk about it in the round.
It's a difficult issue, right? Because it's an unpopular thing that immigration has risen to the rate it has. And there is a sense, although there has always been a sense, that we're not allowed to talk about it. I remember reading back a Tony Blair speech in 2005 where he said, in the past you weren't allowed to talk about immigration, but now I'm going to talk about it.
People want to know that the rules and systems that we have in place are fair. People also want to know that those that they elect to government get it, that we're listening. We do get it. We are listening.
So I think there is a bit of a myth around the fact that we actually do always talk about it, and we talk about it at length. We were talking about it in 2005. I remember going to Slovakia when we had the accession of new countries in the EU. We were talking about immigration then. We're still talking about it now. Now, should there be a more positive case made for it? I've actually gone on a bit of a journey on this issue through my reporting, which is to say, on the one hand, you can make the argument, and I remember Caroline Lucas, when she was leader of the Green Party, making it an event I was at. I was hosting a kind of debate, and she was saying, immigrants bring in more tax than they take in benefits. And if you look at those figures, they do, right?
Yeah, by a long way.
But what those figures don't take into account is the usage of public services, right? So immigrants also, when they come into this country, as my parents did, they put their children in their schools, they use the local GP. We don't include that in those figures. So if you try to include that in those figures, you probably get to a more even picture. And so actually, is it irresponsible to suggest to people who can feel and see that this is not the case, that immigrants bring in way more money than they take out of the system? So I think there's almost like it's not honest on either side of the
Yeah,
debate.
I think that's...
But then also, can I just say, there's different experiences around the country. Just before the Brexit vote, I travelled to 6 different places around the country to talk to people about immigration and how it affected their community. And I went to Peterborough, and you could see that in a very short period of time, there had been a massive increase in immigration that had changed the way that this part of Peterborough I was sitting in felt, smelt, looked, sounded, right? And I remember sitting there with this guy who had been born in this same place and had lived there his whole life and had watched his community change around him, and who felt really economically insecure and didn't understand what was happening and was going to vote for Brexit because he felt that immigration had done this to his town. And the changes were real. And I went to the local GP surgery, and the reality was it had put pressure on the GP surgery, and it had put pressure on the local school where there was a really transient population. And you have that experience. And then I went to Lee in Greater Manchester, where there was almost no immigration at that time, and people were also angry about immigration. And I thought to myself, well, why are you angry when it's not happening here? But I do understand that they're looking at what's happening in other parts of the country, and they're feeling economically insecure, and they're thinking, is immigration going to come to where I live, and is it going to have an impact on our services?
I think I just want to be clear about what I'm saying. I'm very specifically not saying that high immigration is a good thing or a bad thing. I think there are perfectly legitimate views on both sides. There are, lots of people.
We should be more honest about it.
Well, there are lots of people who quite legitimately think high immigration is a good thing. There are lots of people who quite legitimately think we shouldn't have any immigration at all, or minimal, for the reasons you outlined. I guess my frustration, and I suspect...
Well, I don't think that's the answer to what I was saying, but yeah.
No. But my frustration, I suspect the frustration of a lot of people listening or watching this, is if you're going to have immigration in the hundreds of thousands, and you have to get out, surely, and make the case for why you need to economically to fill jobs and so on and so forth, and then put the infrastructure in place, build more houses, make sure you've got NHS, blah, 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 or cut it right back and just accept the consequences. But don't have high immigration, constantly say it's a bad thing and you're going to reduce it, and then do nothing about it.
Obviously been a massive trust issue for people. And then we have to ask, why do we need so many people coming into the country? And actually, Rachel Reeves made the argument for high-skilled people coming into the country.
We know that the UK is in an international competition for talent in vital growth sectors. That is why last week I set out plans for attracting global talent to Britain. We will look at the visa routes for very highly skilled people, so the best people in the world choose the UK to live, work and create wealth, bringing jobs and investment to Britain.
Part of the reason we need it is because we haven't trained people in these shortage industries back here. So we need to train them. And again, successive governments talk about doing it and then never actually do it. But there is a negative impact for the amount of immigration. I mean, I agree with you in as much as I don't have a position on it either way. What I think is problematic is, and I thought this when I was travelling around the country, if people don't have a school place for their kid, or their housing is difficult, or they feel that their children aren't going to get a home down the road, or they're waiting weeks for a doctor's appointment, it may be nothing to do with immigration, but it's a problem. And we have to fix the problem if you want to take away the anxiety that people have about immigration. So I sort of think, in a way, we talk about immigration, but the problem isn't all about immigration. It's about people's actual experiences of their lives. Secondly, and this is much more linked to the immigration, if immigration means that we are paying people less because we are importing cheap labour, which in some industries has been the case, then that basically fuels our productivity problem, because it means there is less of an incentive for companies to invest in the other ways in which we can boost productivity, because they don't need to, because they've got easy access to low wages.
Now, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has just given her big speech about growth, where, amongst other things, she announced the third runway for Heathrow, as predicted.
As our only hub airport, Heathrow is in a unique position, and we cannot duck the decision any longer. I have always been clear that a third runway at Heathrow would unlock further growth, boost investment, increase exports, and make the UK more open and more connected. And now the case is stronger than ever. Because our reforms to the economy, like speeding up the planning system and our plans to modernise UK airspace, means the delivery of this project is now set up for success.
Anushka, to you, the trickiest question of the week. How many times do you think Rachel Reeves used the word growth in that speech?
Well, in case you missed it, Tom, economic growth is the #1 priority for this country.
53.
53.
That's a good effort.
How long was
isn't
the speech?
it?
That's
I don't
pretty
know.
good.
That's pretty good. More substantially, are you convinced by the government's growth strategy? Let me put it another way. Do you think, and do the people you talk to think, the government's growth strategy will lead to growth?
Well, I think the people I speak to think there are definitely good things in what she said today. I think there is a sense that they panicked when they realised that previous things they had done were having a negative impact on growth and that things weren't going as fast as they hoped, including the massive rise, which she obviously acknowledged was very difficult to do on employer NICs, which has sent businesses into a spin. We talked about it here before, that Heathrow is oven ready, as Boris Johnson would put it. I mean, it actually could still take 10 years to happen, but it is a plan that is ready to go. The Oxford-Cambridge link is something that was already being talked about. And the same for actually a number of the other projects. The one thing that is, I think, a bit of a critique on it today, I think they tried to come up with an answer, is the big things they focused on are in the southeast, right? You're talking about largely runways in southeast airports, although they did mention the Midlands as well. And you're talking about a line between Oxford and Cambridge. Now, that doesn't really fit with what I remember hearing from Rachel Reeves and from Keir Starmer, which is that what they really cared about was regional economic growth, regional inequality.
Now, as I said at the start of the show, Robert was not with us because he was interviewing the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and that took much longer than we thought. So he didn't manage to join us, but he did send this summary of his thoughts after doing the interview.
What I really wanted to get underneath is the extent to which what she's announced is what you might call gesture economics, and how much will actually change the landscape of the UK and indeed improve the quality of life and the living standards of British people. So let's just start with the headline announcement, which is this third runway at Heathrow. I said, when will we actually see this third runway? She couldn't give me a date. She said it was all up to Heathrow, and the only thing that she said she was confident about, was that a so-called development consent order, a DCO, will, she hoped, be approved in the lifetime of this Parliament. Now, just to understand what that means, it means, yes, approval for the runway may formally be given within the Parliament, but the actual construction won't start almost certainly till after that. So we may not see this new runway for at least 10 years, maybe 15 years. It's one reason why, of course, Ed Miliband isn't resigning from the government anytime soon, because, you know, even though he would take the view, which some would say is just economic common sense, that new runways are not consistent with an ambition to reduce carbon emissions, frankly, that's for the birds at the moment as a genuine trade-off, because we can't even be confident that this runway will ever be built. But then let's look at the other big infrastructure project, or set of projects in fact, which is joining up Oxford and Cambridge with speeding up the railway link, new housing, new reservoirs, potentially a new town. I would say two things about that. One is, there is absolutely no question that that will generate prosperity. It will attract new businesses, it will help the commercialisation of all that know-how and knowledge in our two world-class universities, Oxford and Cambridge. I should say we have got other world-class universities, they are available, but we're just talking about those two at the moment. And you know, talking to sort of ministers and officials, it's pretty clear to me that we will begin to see really positive developments, flows of new investment to the area off the back of this announcement somewhat sooner than we'll see the possible benefits from Heathrow. So I would regard the creation of the so-called Oxford-Cambridge supercluster as, in a way, a more ambitious announcement that is likely to yield genuine returns rather faster. And then finally, I asked her about her backing for the Old Trafford redevelopment, the redevelopment of the stadium and associated housing around it and all the rest of it. And I asked her how much public money would go into it. She said that was up to Andy Burnham. She didn't have Andy Burnham, the Metro Mayor of the Manchester region. She didn't have the numbers, but I suppose what some people will notice is that public money does look as though it's going in, and whether that's, altogether the right thing to do, given that Manchester United is, I think it's arguably, well, I'm not sure whether it's the richest club in the world, but it's certainly one of the 2 or 3 richest clubs in the world. Does it really need taxpayer support? That's over to you to decide.
So what have you got on your agenda this week? What are you looking forward to? What do you think we'll be talking about?
Well, I mean, just in terms of Rachel's speech, I think we'll continue to talk about that. And just the one thing I think perhaps there needed to be more of in that speech, although she did try and mention it, is for what purpose is economic growth the thing that we go for? And I do think they need to articulate a little bit more strongly, because she did say at one point, well, I want working people to be better off. And I immediately got someone to send me the chart which shows that living standards have basically increased in every parliament in recent times. So if their aim is to just improve the living standards, then that is not ambitious.
Yeah.
Like, where is their ambition? What makes them a Labour government? Why do they want this economic growth? What is the motivation? And I think they probably need to focus a bit more on the motivation and the end game. And that becomes quite difficult when you consider Heathrow, for example, isn't going to be liked by the climate lobby. She once said she wanted to be the country's first Green Chancellor. Is that going to continue to chime? In terms of other things, I'm doing something tomorrow looking at councils, which is something I'm very interested in, who are still financially really struggling, and things are not necessarily getting better as a result of everything that has been going on so far. So I'm hoping to focus a bit more on that for the rest of the week.
All right, very good. We will pick it up next time we record. A reminder that you can get in touch with your questions and thoughts and comments by emailing us at talkingpolitics@itn.co.uk. And I should say that we are enjoying this podcast a lot. We're going to try and really concentrate on building it this year. So we would genuinely appreciate your feedback. It would be very helpful to us. PMQs is back next Wednesday at 11:50 a.m. live here on ITVX. It says it right there on the autocue, so just read it, mate. It's not that hard. As my children always tell me, reading aloud, I mean, how hard can it be? It's always good to know your children really believe in the work you're doing and how hard it is. But they're in their 20s, that's what happens. Now, you can listen to everything we discuss on our Talking Politics podcast, available, of course, on your favourite podcast platform and on the news section of ITVX. If you're enjoying it, please do hit subscribe. That will make our week. That's it for now. See you next time. Goodbye.